Hello and welcome to the Duquesne Sports pregame show here on Duquesne Student TV. I'm Jack Morgan. Alongside me is Dylan Fisser. It's an 8-10 Friday, finally. I love these 8-10 Fridays. They've been doing it on ESPN. They're doing it again tonight. And the Duquesne Dukes are starring in it. They will be playing the Fordham Rams. It's going to be a big one. Fordham sitting at 4-9 in the conference. And Duquesne, they've won 6 of their last 8 conference games after starting 0-5. They're going to be looking to make it 7 of 9 here against the Fordham Rams. And Duquesne, we'll start with you, Dylan. I mean, to start the year, really didn't look good to start 2024. They were winless to begin the conference schedule for 5 games. I mean, it didn't look good. The team was getting restless, but, man, they've turned it around quickly, haven't they? They
really have turned it around. I'm really excited. I come into all these games super excited to just watch these players go to work and really step into their own styles of play every week. And that's really what they struggled with in the beginning of the year. I felt like we didn't have the right guys in. We didn't have the right plans for those players we had on the court. But now we're starting to see guys in the position that they were meant to be in, and we're watching them succeed. Now, I'm really excited for this game too, Jack, because I see a lot of similarities between the Rams and the Dukes here. I think Duquesne and Fordham match up in a lot of different categories across the board. If you look at their rankings in the A-10, 2 very similar squads. They both struggled with shooting and scoring overall. Scoring, the Dukes ranked 13th, Fordham ranks 12th. And then with team field goal percentage and team three-point percentage, the Dukes are 12th and the Rams are 15th. So struggles for both of them shooting, but the Dukes have something that the Rams do not have, and that is one Mr. Jimmy Clark and Day-Day Grant, both averaging 15-plus points per game and both top 12 in the A-10 in scoring. Now, while both of these teams match up pretty well with their scoring struggles, the Dukes have those stars that can pop off and really set a good tone for them, while Fordham hasn't really had that offensively, and they haven't really had that star power.
Absolutely, and Fordham last year was a really, really good team, especially in conference play. There was those 3 teams at the top. Fordham was one of them, and it was not easy to take them down. Duquesne found that out the hard way. They went 0-2 against them last year. They lost to them at home by, it was about a narrow amount, but once they went on the road, they got the doors blown off of them, and it was bad. So they come back to Rose Hill a year later, almost a year later. I mean, I believe it was March 4th. It was during spring break. I know that. We're about a week out from spring break here as it is. It's about the same timeline where you head into the later part of the season and you need a win. And the conference is getting really tight towards the middle. They were looking to break away from the pack and finally get back to 500 for the first time all year. I mean, for Duquesne, this has got to be a huge game.
It's definitely a big game, and that's why I definitely see the stars are going to come out, and that's why I mentioned Jimmy and I mentioned Day-Day. I think that they're going to shine. But like you said, it's definitely going to be close, and that's why I think for Fordham, if they win this, they're really going to have to squeak it out, and it's going to come down to their rebounding, because I think that might be the one edge that they really do have on the Dukes is that rebounding game. So they average just under 37 rebounds a game. That's 4th in the A-10. And then they're 2nd in the A-10 in offensive rebounds a game, mostly due to 2 players on the Rams squad, Abdu Simbila, and Khalid Moore, both with over 200 rebounds individually this season, both ranking top 15 in the A-10. So like you said, Jack, it's definitely going to be tight, and it's going to come down to those individual efforts where we're going to see maybe the Rams pull out a late, really crucial win.
Yeah, absolutely. And for Duquesne, I mean, so Duquesne's going to have to go up against that. Also, I mean, for Fordham, you look at how they've played. They've lost their last 4 games. They had a tough one against VCU, and playing against VCU, regardless of if you're home or away, that's a tough matchup anyway. It ended up being an 18-point loss against St. Bonaventure. Not good. It's not a good loss, especially coming at home. So it's 2 games they had at home on the 6th and the 14th of February they lost. They have spent the last week on the road. On Saturday, the 17th, they lost at Dayton, 78-70. They played them close. However, when you play Dayton and you only lose by that amount, it's nothing to really hang your heads over. I mean, Duquesne's had their fair share of battles with Dayton this year, and they've lost both of them. But they've really played Dayton close, and so did Fordham. And their last time out, Duquesne knows a thing or two about this. They lost to Davidson. However, the Fordham loss to Davidson was a little worse. It was by 15. But both teams struggle against Davidson. Now, I want to get your take on this. So, in the postgame press conference last week, it was actually earlier this week. Keith Dambrod had a comment that some found interesting on Twitter, or formerly Twitter, now X. Thank you, Elon Musk. So he had a comment about the A-10 being similar to the Big Ten. The A-10, it feels like each of these teams just beat up on each other. You have your top 2 or 3, and that's the same case in the Big Ten, especially the Big Ten this year. You had Purdue and Illinois. They're both the top teams, but everywhere behind that, it feels like these teams are just beating up on each other. And that feels the same way here in the A-10. I mean, you've had teams like St. Bonaventure who have looked good. They had a good start, and they're getting beat up on by these other teams. They almost beat Richmond. I mean, they almost beat, teams like St. Bonaventure are getting down by Duquesne, who is in the back half of the A-10 standings. And then teams like Duquesne, who are also in the back half, are taking down teams towards that top. I mean, it really feels like it's a Big Ten type conference. But that's what makes the A-10 so good. And do you see that similarity?
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying, Jack. And that's the fun thing about the A-10. I just feel like when you look at the rankings, which we do here on this show, there's so much shuffling throughout the year. And there's like the preseason polls compared to what matchups and scores we're seeing at the end of the year. And I think that's what you get, and I think that's because it's the A-10. There's a lot more movement. I know they're not as much, I guess, in the spotlight, and more is going on, and I guess it makes for more exciting games. And sometimes, there are blowouts. There's things you don't see coming, but at the end of the day, I think that's what makes the Atlantic 10 so much fun.
It really does make it fun. I mean, for Duquesne, their final few games, they have Fordham tonight, obviously, as we've been discussing already. Then they have LaSalle and George Mason. Now, LaSalle has not been great, but they have the killer bees, Khalil Brantley and Jameer Brickus. I mean, either of those two guys can beat you on any given night. I don't think LaSalle is a great supporting cast, but that's beside the point, because the main story here are the killer bees. They could beat Duquesne. They could come into Duquesne and beat them on senior nights. You can see that happening. George Mason, they just took down Dayton earlier this week. They are at home against Duquesne, but Duquesne, if they win a game like this against Fordham on primetime at Rose Hill, who's saying they can't go into George Mason and take down the Patriots? And then you have a game on the road against VCU. Maybe that's not as close. And you come home against George Washington. But George Washington and James Bishop has been fantastic. He's really led this GW team to be close in many games and, in fact, pull out a few. And all these teams have great non-conference records. They showed that they can play, and they showed the A-10 is pretty good. And the A-10 looks, right now, if Richmond's able to win out and win the tournament, and Dayton at least gets to the semifinals, it looks like the A-10 could be a 2-bid league. This is a league where last year it was just, without a doubt, only a 1-bid league. There was no one that was on the fringe of bracketology. It was really just straight up. The one team that wins a tournament is getting in. And that's good for the A-10. And speaking of which, we're going to take a look at the A-10 standings here and just kind of skim over what we're looking at as we head into this weekend of action. You have Richmond and Loyola Chicago at the top. They're both at 11-2. However, Richmond has a tiebreaker. They are the number 1 seed in the A-10 tournament. They control their own destiny. Now, if they both were to win out, they would both clinch a share of the A-10 title. Dayton right now, they are 11-3. That loss to George Mason didn't help them at all. They're sitting at that 3 seed, but however, they still have a lot of time here. They got 3 or 4 games. They do have a game on the Richmond and Loyola Chicago top 2, but regardless, if they win out, who's saying they can't jump to that number 1 seed? You got VCU and UMass, and now the VCU UMass, the 4 and 5 is going to be very interesting because the top 4 teams receive a double bye. Then you have a team like George Mason, who is lurking at 7-6. They have they have a great first-year head coach who's really been able to help them, gain some of that energy and momentum heading into this year after a lackluster past few years, to be completely honest. St. Bonaventure was towards the top. Now they are not. In fact, they find themselves at 7. They found themselves at 7. Wow. Then you got St. Joe's, who Duquesne just took down this past weekend. Then it's Duquesne. They find themselves right in the middle of the pack at 9. Then at 10, the Rhode Island Rams. Got Davidson and Fordham following that. Davidson at 5-8, and as we said, Fordham at 4-9. Got the LaSalle Explorers, like we said, with the Killer Bees. They're at 4-10. Then you have GW, who is at 3-10, but dangerous. They can play. They can play ball. And St. Louis Billikens, well, they haven't exactly been competitive this year. Can't say much about them. They had some good, we saw them this past week against Duquesne. They have some good players. However, they just really haven't been able to get much going, which kind of shocking. I mean, I guess you lose a couple of guys makes sense, but SLU hasn't done much. But, as for that, we're looking at the standings here, and it's going to change, Dylan, right? It's going to change. We can't really predict what's going to happen, especially in that middle. For Duquesne, where's kind of that, magic number of where they can get in this, they probably can't get a top 4. They probably can't get a double bye, but they got to match up against middle-of-the-pack teams. What do you think they can do here?
I think honestly, I don't know. I think Duquesne is in a pretty decent spot, and I think they might sit around where they are right now. They've got still, I think, a lot to work out and a lot of excitement for next year. But when I look at Duquesne and where they're sitting now, I look at where we looked at them in the preseason polls. And I think it was a little bit ambitious looking at the Duke season.
In retrospect, might have been.
Might have been a little bit ambitious, especially maybe, from coaching perspectives. But it's still a lot to be proud of for them this year. Despite, I don't think the rankings in the A10 is where they're going to look to find their accomplishments from this year. I think it's those individual improvements and performances. But I think that's where the Duke should be excited. I think they'll probably break even the rest of the way, and I think they'll probably end up in the same spot.
I think the other thing is just a tournament. I mean, I think that's all really that everyone's focused on right now. When it comes down to it, it's not let's try and get a better spot in the standings for, for whatever reason. It's for the tournament. Everyone's saying let's get a better seeding for the tournament. It's not about where they are in the standings for the regular season. It all comes down to the postseason, and that's where Duquesne's really going to look to make their mark. And they have the talents. They really do, but a team like Fordham, who was kind of in the same spot as LaSalle was last year for Duquesne, when Duquesne fell to them. So you can't really get too far ahead of yourself if you're Duquesne. You got to take it one game at a time. And let's take a look at our players to watch here for both sides. Duquesne, where are they looking tonight, Dylan?
Yeah, for the Dukes, I'm definitely looking at Dave Dixon for sure. Now, I talked about Fordham's rebounding. I've talked about Fordham's rebounding ability a little bit, but defensively, their rebounding has not been very sound. They're 14th in the A10 in defensive rebounding. And where does Dave Dixon dominate the most? Those offensive rebounds, grabbing it, putting it right back up. And we've seen that a lot recently from him. Now, last time out against Fordham in January, he went 5 of 7, 12 points, and 6 rebounds. So good performance initially. Now, more recently, a week ago, when the Dukes played St. Joe's, he had a first career double-double for Dave at 17 points, 10 rebounds, 3 steals, and 2 blocks. Dave Dixon is hot over the past few weeks, and I think it's going to continue against Fordham.
It's been pretty impressive to see him progress over the past year and change now. He's really been impressive. He's a big guy to look out for Duquesne. I'm looking at Day Grant. I mean, he started out the conference play not as great. He ended up getting a concussion. He comes back. That game against Rhode Island, he puts up 31 on the road in a hostile environment. I mean, that's a heck of a game to come through with at a big time. I think he's going to have to do that tonight against Fordham. I think last year he wasn't as great. The Duquesne team as a whole wasn't great shooting the ball at Rose Hill last year. So I think they've got to do that tonight. I think it starts with Day Grant shooting the ball. Now we'll move on to Fordham. Who you watching for Fordham?
Yeah, and I like that pick, Jack. And if the Rams are going to go toe-to-toe with these Duquesne shooters, they're going to have to rely on their top scorer, and that's Jaffe Mador. Again, leads the Rams in scoring, but last time out against the Dukes, only went 1 of 6, 0 for 2 from the 3. Only played 15 minutes, so he really wasn't a factor in that game. If they want to win here, they got to go toe-to-toe with Day Grant, Jimmy Clark. They got to put points on the board and get this guy going.
Gonna be a fun one for Duquesne to watch for Duquesne, especially with Mador. Mador is fantastic, great guard. As for me, I'm kind of looking towards Kyle Rose. Now, Kyle Rose, his point production in a few games here in February have been pretty good. He put up 26 points against St. Louis on the 3rd of February. That was a big win. He ends up putting up 10 points against St. Bonaventure on February the 14th. They ended up losing that game, but he was doing his thing. He was doing what he needed to do. He ended up putting up 17 in a loss against Dayton this past week on February 17th. I think he's going to have to do the same this time around. Also got to remember, Kyle Rose last year wasn't great against Duquesne. He didn't shoot well in that game against Duquesne at home at Fordham. They still came away with the win. However, they don't have that same roster this year. They don't have that same explosiveness. It shows in the record, and it shows just watching them. So I think he's going to have to really ball out tonight for Fordham to get the win. And let's put our game prediction. Does Fordham get the win? Or do the Dukes come out on top here, Dylan?
I do have the Dukes coming out on top here. I just think, like you said, I think Day Grant on top of Jimmy Clark, Dave Dixon. I think they're going to be too much. I don't think the Rams are going to be able to go toe-to-toe with them. I have the Dukes winning 75-70.
You know what? I'm going to go with that same angle there in terms of the Dukes winning. However, I think this ends up being a closer one. I think Duquesne does get off to that really weird, slow, murky start in the first 4 minutes that they usually do. Once they come out the under 16 timeout, it seems like a switch is flipped. I think that's going to be the same thing tonight on the road. I think the Dukes come away with the win. I think they win 84-78. I think, once again, I think the defense is not going to be as effective. I think the offense is going to shine bright tonight under those bright lights of ESPN2. Don't get many games on the major ESPN networks. I mean, it's the A10. And even though I might argue there should be more, that's just the nature of it. You don't get many chances to impress on national television. I think the guys are going to be looking to do that tonight. I think the Duquesne Dukes will come out on top. However, we'll see at 8:30. We'll see in due time. Enjoy the game. You've been watching the Duquesne Sports Pregame Show for Dylan Fissler. I'm Jack Morgan saying so long. Enjoy the game, everyone.